Well, hello there. It's very nice to see you. I've tried to experiment and use OBS, and it just goes out of sync so quickly. It's because I'm not using a webcam. I'm just using the Apple Mac video, and it goes out of sync so easily, and it makes it unusable. So I've just tried using a Zoom thing. Hello, I can sort of point to myself, but it's going to be a little bit distracting because I'm kind of using a second monitor. So I'm sorry, I'm not going to look at the camera all the time. I'm just going to concentrate on the material. So a couple of my patrons asked how I've done this, how I've actually put this Ahsoka Tano cue together. So I thought I'd take you through my compositional process, and hopefully there'll be a few gems in there which might be interesting for you. So the first thing I'm going to start with is melody, melody content, and how I've approached it. There's one main thing about melody, and in fact everything in music, and that's to do with energy. I know that sounds absolutely bizarre, but it's to do with the interplay between progressive movement and recessive movement. So progressive movement is things which are moving forward, like that, and recessive movement is things which are moving away, like that. Progressive movement, shorter note values, getting louder, getting quicker, getting faster, staccato, that sort of thing. Wide leaps. Recessive things, the exact opposite of that. Longer note values, diminuendo, getting slower, quieter, rest, ultimately. And this was a concept that was developed a while ago now, but I haven't really heard it articulated too much. The one author that really has done that is a guy called John Paynter. Let's just write it down, and then I'm going to make it bigger. And he wrote a book called Sound and Structure, which is actually a teaching book. In fact, he wrote two books. I think one was called Sound and Silence, I think was the first one. Then the second one was called Sound and Structure. It was essentially made for teachers in the UK in the late 80s, early 90s, when GCSEs started happening, and you had to get students to compose music, because before then it was just technical work. But this was sort of free composition, or in other words, make it up type music, rather than follow somebody else's style. So you had to find ways of doing this. I think, I don't really can see that. It's going to be sort of blurry and the opposite. But that is the book. When was it made? Cambridge University Press, 1992. So it's a really old book. But it's just filled with brilliant gems. So, I mean, he defines music, basically, or the musical experience, there's a difference. Sound, time, ideas, and technique are the four corners of musical experience. Music results from dynamic relationships between them. It's just extraordinary. I mean, the guy's got a sort of philosophy of music in the first sentence, which I haven't really heard articulated before. So when he talks about melody, he talks about the interplay between progressive movement and recessive movement. And the project that he bases it on is to do with things like Somewhere Over the Rainbow, where you start off with a wide leap. I'm trying to find it, actually, but I can't find it at the moment. But it's okay, I've remembered it. Where you start off with a wide leap, and you take a bit of a journey with it. So here... So this idea starts off with a huge progressive movement because there's a wide leap. So the classic thing to do in the wide leap is to only go in the space that you've allocated in the wide leap. So in this case, it's an octave between middle C and the C above middle C. You can't go above it because that doesn't work. That doesn't work. You've negated the space by having more space. and more ambit, and so as a result it doesn't really work. So the progression is in here because of the wide leap. So we've got large scale progression, and we've also got smaller scale progression, so sort of recessions as well. So well, progressions and recessions, we've got a macro level and we've got a micro level. So there are two different levels that we're talking about. Because here, that's slightly recessive because it's going down within the leap, but I want it to. But also, this whole thing is also recessive ultimately, because this bit here is so strong that it needs all of that in order to satisfy, at least for that 2 bars, the impact of this large space here. So that's why that works. The other thing is that it keeps staying up there because later in the tune it's just a long descent all the way through the whole thing. So that's important, that he's staying up there, because if you come down too early, you would it just doesn't work. So you have to temper it, you have to balance it, and it has to be done with a bit of nuance. And I think this is sometimes what some composers forget. But essentially it's all about progressive movement and recessive movement. So what is progressive, what is recessive? And I've just told you, progressive movement are things like wide leaps and intervals and getting louder, and recessive movement tends to be smaller note values. So you might sort of think, well, hold a sec, there are some small note values here, but music doesn't exist in just 2 bars. So we've also got to think that that is leading to this ultimate phrase. Whoops. That's the direction. So it needs some impetus to get there, because if it didn't have that, that's useless. It doesn't have any identity to it. There's no rhythm. So we have to have a rhythmic identity for it to work. And with all good melodies, they have at least 3 different rhythmic values in them. It's a Rimsky-Korsakov thing that he wrote in his orchestration book somewhere. I think it's about choirs, but you'll have to find out for me. So here we've got half notes minims, we've got crotchets, quarter notes, and 8th note quavers. 3 different rhythms. Works perfectly well. But it's interesting how Paynter sort of describes this in terms of progressive movement and recessive movement. The complicated one occurs where you have this. That's just literally, I've just made that up. Where you have a dotted minim, it becomes really difficult, because there should be something in the beat here. You can't sort of distinguish it away from the accompaniment. It needs something else. And also, sometimes the notes themselves don't lend themselves easily to something else. If I keep going down, it ends up doing that. And if I use the same note, that's not going to work either. So maybe that would work, sort of slower things. But what's important is that you have to have something there, because without it, that dotted note has recessive qualities, not progressive qualities, and you're trying to have progressive qualities in this style of writing. Pardon me. Of course, not all melodies work that way. So, for example, in this one, like that, the Rachmaninoff. You know, it doesn't really work that way. It's more to do with the sort of symmetry of quavers and crotchets that sort of kind of works better. I think I've done a whole sort of thing on ET where, you know, it's got 3 note values in the first phrase. It's got an opening interval, wide interval. You go back within the scope of the interval. In fact, if you put it alongside here in terms of structure, it's slightly different because, of course, it's in 3 minims. But you can kind of see there's a lot of similarity between the design of those of those 2 themes. It's because it's a classic structure. It's because it has upward momentum, progressive movement, followed by kind of recessive movement in the sense that it's going down within the ambit, but it's also a little bit progressive because it's leading on to this thing, which is symmetry in exact inversion of the opening interval. And having those things in there, progression, recession, balance, symmetry, and 3 different note values, what gives it its special qualities. When we had Giacchino's version of his Rogue One theme, which I think is what he's done is obviously reversed. He's reversed that, and it's not as good because it doesn't work as well. What's happened is it's come down too quickly. It should be okay, and it should have worked. It actually might have been better. Might have been better just changing that note because you're not coming down too early. Because now, here, that's too progressive because it's now going to a 6, which is actually wider than the first interval. Now, it's not bad to have a wider interval than the first interval. It's just called an interval widening technique. It's where you have octave. You know, it should theoretically work. But there are some flaws in this which make it not work. And actually, it would have been simply better to just use the main title. Not have this. But it might not have been Giacchino's choice. It might have been a studio decision where we want a specific identity, but you've only got 3 weeks to come up with it. Well, that's not long enough. You can't do that. And people don't really understand that it takes time to come up with these things. Williams didn't just sort of suddenly invent the Star Wars theme tune. And okay, some cynics will say, yes, he heard it in King's Row and then copied it. Maybe. But I think it takes a lot of time to come up with these things. So that's stage 1, is melody writing. It does take a lot of time. But also, if you know what you're doing, in other words, the interplay between, is my progressive movement too much for something? Is my recessive movement too much for something? Am I sort of mucking around with it too much? Am I interfering with what's going on, or am I allowing the flow of time to progress smoothly? Those are all questions that you need to decide for yourself. So in this melody here, we've got Kevin Kiner's melody. So it's not mine. So I've changed it slightly, I think. I can't quite remember what the original one was. But you know, it's got a balance to it. It goes up and then it comes down. So there's a broad scale of progressive movement going up and then recessive movement coming back down. It's got a small amount of symmetry in the sense that I've started with a little minor third and I'm ending with a minor third as well. It's got some repetition and balance, which you also need. So I've got dotted minim, crotchet, dotted minim, 2 quavers, a slight variation. And it's also got 3 different rhythmic values in the first melody as well. The problem with it is this dotted minim. How do I maintain some sort of direction where I want progressive movement, but there's nothing here to give it that? You You know, it might have been better to have, you know, a little twiddle. Might have worked better. But what I think is that, okay, there's a crescendo there, so all it needs is some accompaniment here for that to work. So that's exactly what I've done. I put a crescendo in, I put tremolando, that's a progressive device, where you still have some recessive elements, but the main thing is having that beat. I don't need it in that bar, because that's recessive, so I don't want to copy it. Here I do want that beat to make that dotted rhythm a point of sort of, you know, jumping off. Let's have a listen. I actually changed this bar as well. I'll explain why in a minute. Yeah. And it's having this beat here. Now. It could have perhaps done without that, but I thought because we're already having progressive movement, it couldn't afford another one. You could even put quavers there as well. Let's get rid of that. I'm not sure why that's there. So that's theme number 1. And theme number 2 is I've played around with Anakin's theme, which is then just simply doubled with cor anglais, clarinet, flute. And it's Anakin blaming himself for allowing Ahsoka at that point to get into trouble, of whatever that is. I think this is from Series 2, Episode 1. So what I've done, though, is that I've reharmonized it. And I've also put little splashes on the offbeats, because that's what Williams does. And I'm also sort of trying to harmonize it in the same... similar vein that Williams does, so usually sort of, you know, suspended chords, and also have those sorts of pedal tones and augmented intervals as well. So put together. Another example of kind of, it could have done with another splash there, but because I want it to feel longer, I've actually taken it out and put it in later. You could have had another splash at this point. So it needs splash because, again, it feels progressive, but it doesn't have any forward momentum to keep it going. So we need the pizzicato for it to actually work. In this case, it's just doubled with the harp, which is just a common device, pizzicato with harp. And here, I'm just allowing the notes to do their trick. I don't need any other momentum because it's quite an unusual chord. It has that sort of quality to it. It has this sort of mysterious... like that. So I'm allowing the notes to do their trick. I'm allowing the ear to accept that there's an augmented chord there of some description with an added ninth and all sorts of different things. So I don't need any recession. So there is a certain amount of judgment that you have to always utilize and then justify. If you're not justifying it, then you're not in control of your ideas. The whole point of being a composer is that you know what your ideas are and that you're in control of them, that you know what to do with them. So here, this was a problematic moment. So in the scene, let's play the scene with the video first of all. So clearly setting the scene, Jedi Temple. Sorry about the dropped frames. So now she's admitting she was wrong. And she's reflecting. So that's why her theme's there. There's a sort of gravitas at that point. And now he's sort of blaming himself, so that's why Anakin's theme there. Mace is always a bit scary, he's always put in sort of dark material. What? There's a slight bit of sort of, oh no, I'm, you know, gonna have to take my punishment. So on the wipe through to the next scene, I've just sort of, you know, started that because it's an unfinished bit. It needed something else to just sort of keep it flowing into the next scene. So there's obviously a lot in there, and I thought I'd take you through what I've done. As I say, I've just sort of done this video twice now, but this is the only one that you're going to see because the other ones just didn't work at all. So in terms of, you know, getting myself into the sort of frame of thinking, I'd probably just do a bit of listening, first of all. So pre-composition is really important. What do? I'm listening to Williams. I'm listening to Kent Kiner. I might even listen to the whole episode and Kevin Kiner and see what he's done. And then I try to come up with my own version of what I would have done if I'd been the composer on this show, and justify it as well. Because I think if you can argue your case, it means that you are in control of what's going on, even if somebody doesn't like it, because it's such a personal thing. And the whole point is to get into the drama of what's going on. So I've sort of, you know, Attack of the Clones, that era has a sense of mystery and augmented mystique. By augmented mystique, I mean literally augmented sort of notes. That sort of idea, you know, those sorts of chords. It's also sometimes got lots of synth voices as well, so I've kind of gone with that. And the first chord, and actually most of the material, I derive from the Hungarian minor scale. So that's just a minor chord with a sharp 4, like that. So the first chord is actually a Hungarian minor chord, and everything else is sort of slightly modernistic, pointillistic, like that. I could have even sort of perhaps not done it rhythmically, you know, maybe it would have been, but that's difficult to kind of mock up if you're going to do it that way, but a box around notes and just go play in any order. That might have been something that Williams could have done. So we've got two levels here. We've got a blended technique where I blended the bottom extension of this chord with, which is like a D7, with violas just tremolandering. Of course, you need enough violas for that to work. If you didn't have enough, then you would have to use something else. But that's difficult if you want strings to come in as well. So I wanted the first violins to actually have another sort of chord complex at that point, which is just actually it's just that. A major chord with a flat 2. So that's a 4/18 chord, which is, guess what, a Hungarian minor derived chord. So everything coincides. I've then just changed it at the end. So what I did, I wasn't very satisfied with the join here, so I actually took off some of these notes at that point. We'll just play that through. So here is just a little sort of cheeky sort of clump of notes here, which are all derived from the other chord that I'm doing, which is just a harmonic minor, chord complex. Like that, or even harmonic major idea. But it just needed to cut off, so I've kind of, you know, cut off those things after 3 beats so that we have more of the clump, and it makes more of Ahsoka's entry at that point, where she's sort of looking sad and got caught up in her own success. So yeah, so this thing here really is just to support the bottom of that. It's just ethereal sort of padding, really, and that's all it's doing. Otherwise, the vibraphone and the harp is just, you know, the harp is just doing the attack. And they might not be together. That's okay. I'm not expecting, you know, if it was performed live, they probably wouldn't be. It'd be very awkward to sort of do. But that's fine. It doesn't need to be. You know, it's not just colour. It's also just having this sort of spiky, pointillistic thing is more important, really, in some ways. Note that the pedal is down at that point as well. And these are all sort of part of Hungarian Minor, with 2 added notes which are not part of it at all, because I kind of want them to... that needed to come off at that point. Just be a little bit angular and a bit sort of odd, basically, is what I'm going for. So it's just a chord that cascades downwards. Okay, so here, so we got an A flat major, but it's all, you know, so often he has sort of second inversion type chords, not the whole thing, because this is just a C minor chord. Don't want to really play it on that. So we got A flat, B natural, that's a 420 chord. Actually, yes, no, it is a 420 chord. So another chord, which is harmonizing this. And it seems to still work because of the sharp 4 in C minor. That's going to work because it's Hungarian minor, and you know, G flat or F sharp is going to work. Hence why that chord exists. And then I've put in a nice sort of little pedal bit here, which could be taken out, but it just gives a bit more tension in that point. Without it, and also a sense of space, and sometimes you know, there's something very grand about the old Grand Republic. You know, it's supposed to be sort of Corinthian columns and sort of Gothic. You know, that's how cathedrals were built, is to give, you know, the people a sense of space, looking up to the heavens, the thick sort of smoke of the sort of incense, sort of not obscuring the top, almost like sort of clouds in the sky. And, you know, by having very, very high and low here, then you create that sort of sense of space and depth as well, and darkness. So I've already told you about why I've put that in there. And then I'm just using basic voice leading to get from one chord to another chord. So here we got a minor chord with a major 7th, and I'm putting it in third inversion because, again, that's what Williams tends to do. So it's a nice tense chord. There we go. You could even add sort of muted horns at that point, but I already wanted some there. I suppose I could have put them in horns 5, 6, 7, 8, but it's just a bit too much. I don't need to have the blend there if I don't want it. We've already got the chord here in everything else. And the continuity note is that G. Without it, it's interesting, it seems a bit too pleasant. Get a sort of interesting thickness by keeping it present. Quite gnarly. And it, again, it's always going to work because it's part of C minor, Hungarian minor scale. So in this point here, I've got unison strings, but the bass is doing the bass. So a typical John Williams type of... like that. He might have gone up there, but because Anakin's theme is coming in, I can't do that. So that's because Anakin's sort of coming in there. But yeah, I mean, just a sort of very basic arpeggiatic. And it almost, you kind of want the bass to cut out at that point. But actually, I'm not cutting it out because I actually want the climax to be on this beat as the next melody takes over. It doesn't work otherwise if you if you cut it out. Yeah, it needed that sort of progressive movement just a little bit to keep the momentum going. Not too much, because otherwise you destroy it, but it needed a little bit of it. So harmonically, what's going on? Well, I've also got bass going on. So this is an example of sort of orchestral differentiation. So I've got harmony in the brass. And I've got suspended chords at that point. Let's put in the bass as well. So that's just doubling that an octave higher. There we go. So I think that is it ends up being a sort of 4/14 chord. That sort of add 2. So here, in terms of what's going on, never be afraid of dyads. He uses them all the time. Like that. There's a hint of that sort of Phantom Menace type sort of idea. And now we've got our suspended chord. Like that. Important not to get too much in the way. It's that little gnarl, but because you've got it on a different instrument type, it's okay to have that semitonal rub at that point. The reason for that is, you know, whenever Anakin's talking, there's a dark side element to virtually everything that he does, because it's just foreshadowing. It's strange, isn't it? Because I think the character of Anakin is an interesting one. He has to be made slightly darker, because otherwise he's just Luke, sort of, you know, cheerful and happy. Luke being sort of very innocent. This is where we see Luke in, you know, A New Hope. And then the character merges with his, and you sort of think, well, how can you distinguish it? But then he's very unlikable, in which case, well, hold a sec, why does Obi-Wan really like him? We don't really know. Maybe there's a sense of responsibility and lack of fatherhood that Obi-Wan feels to him. Of course, all of this is stuff that, you know, I think about whilst we're writing. Yeah, sort of 2 other devices. This one, the device of unison strings, no doubling anywhere, orchestral differentiation, bass line, which happens all the harmonies in the brass. So let's just do that section again. Now Anakin's theme. There's a sort of innocent, you know, he's owning up, he's fessing up. Now I think she needs more time. So it's sort of, oh okay. Sort of Ahsoka's sort of not, she's not happy. Hence that sort of descent at that point, which is just triads. Like that. And also with pedals. And just repeated. Very, very simple technique, which Williams uses all the time. So something in one group, followed by the same thing in another group, an octave lower. So in terms of Anakin's theme, I think we talked about the augmented chord just makes it sort of work all the way through. You don't need anything else for that. All that I've done is I've just changed the inversion of the chord there, just to make it a little bit different, because if you don't, then it just becomes dull and boring. And it needs a different colour on this note here, on that 11, otherwise it doesn't really work. But you don't want too much colour. I'm not adding anything else. And this is where sometimes taking away things is actually better than adding them. Change, but not too much. Ooh, bass window. So that's sort of, I mean, you know, not everything has to be a leitmotif or a motif. It could just be a gesture of some description. Here, the gesture is something a little bit tense. You know, it doesn't excuse what happened on Felucia, is what he's saying at that point. Obviously, the syncing with Sibelius and this is awful, but there we go. I think she needs more time away. Yeah. So, and also, as I'm watching it, I'm sort of trying to feel the emotions of the characters, and then go, well, what music would go with that, and then write it. And I think it's really important to have that sort of emotional sort of connectivity, you know, here between what's happening on screen and what's in your heart, really. So then Yoda's talking. I haven't done a Yoda theme for this because it just doesn't seem appropriate at that point. It's being a bit sort of harsh, and this is ramping up. So the ramp up is this. So unison strings. There's some small amount of sort of not quite filigree going on. That kind of relates to this bit that we had before, only in the fact that the texture is the same, but the intent is completely different at that point. So here. And I've done a sort of perhaps slightly un-Williams-y chord at that point. Like that. It's just, you know, a minor chord. Like that. But with sort of slightly swapped registers. And then we have a sort of trumpet call that could have been on the trumpet, but I don't want the trumpets. So the answer is to just put them in the woodwind. And we just get this. And also we get the little bit of gnarl here by having the differentiated sound in a different instrument. It's a sort of technique that Copeland uses quite a lot in his works, where if you have... did I say if ye have? If you have counterpoint, sometimes it's better to put the gnarly one, in other words, the rub, in a different instrument. Not always, because, of course, that doesn't happen in the horns. But it gives quite a nice little timbral differentiation at that point. And also notice that there is no doubling at that point. So again, an example of orchestral differentiation. I don't bring the bass in until bar 19, by the way. And that's it. It lightens up the texture before the depth happens. And you kind of need to get rid of it here. I haven't quite got rid of it here. I could have perhaps got rid of that note, I think. Because it's there. Let's just put that in. Does that improve it? Yeah, that's fine. And then, so usual thing, harmony in the horns. Yeah, and you know, those rubs are so important to John Williams. So what's going on here? So just a triad. So here, slightly more complicated chord. So it's type an alpha chord type at that point, and then minor chord with a sharp with a flat 6, so that's a 420, and then just using voice leading with that sort of dominant type chord. No, any chord of that function will work. And it kind of needs to resolve at that point. So there, I've sort of just left it a little bit as a work in progress. at that point. Also, I'm trying to delay the kind of delaying a little bit of that root note, not wholly. And I probably should change that as well. And then I'm going to cut off there, actually. Does it make it any better if that's an octave lower? So we maintain. So that needs to come down before. Yeah. Bit of forward momentum. Doesn't work. So I'm going to revert back to what it was. Yeah, it was an octave too high. And I haven't done the sort of the final note. And it's just using sort of notes of the harmonic minor at that point. And then ends up on a sort of A flat minor, G sharp minor type idea. So it's all sort of like, I'm sorry I've let you down type sort of stuff at that point. So I'm going to continue with this and then sort of show you how the rest of it goes as soon as I've done it. But of course, art is hard and sometimes it'll take a bit of time. But I hope that's kind of shown you how I've approached a cue of this nature and also shown you a few sort of, you know, how to put things in action. It you know, it is hard. And also it's long as well. I was thinking, well, I could try and do bite-sized stuff, but that, again, it doesn't really help because, you know, having half an hour's of just talking about one thing, you're only going to learn one thing. It's better to sort of like do the whole cue, and then you can sort of pick and choose bits of the chapter markers as you want. I think that's the best way of doing it. I was going to use OBS, hence this is a zoom thing and the thing. Just so that it doesn't go completely out of sync by the end. Hopefully it won't. So I shall see you soon, and thank you for watching.